we are so happy to have with us at the WLUW Chicago Water Campus, Chicago Water Tower Campus, Bonnie Bagdon. She is a storyteller, and she will be telling us about an upcoming performance, and also her director of the performance, Liam Collier. Welcome.
Welcome. How are you today, Trudy?
Very, 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 very well. Okay, well, first of all, tell us the name of your story, and then how it came to be written, how you came to write it.
Okay. The name of the performance is Mrs. President, and it refers to Mary Todd Lincoln. They hadn't quite used very often. I think that it was New York Herald back then coined the term First Lady. But when she became, she is the wife of Mr. Lincoln, she used the title Mrs. President. I think throughout the time he was in office, and so that's how the title is. And it simply talks about, which simply is about their meeting their life together prior to his election. I don't think people have focused on that area a great deal. And her importance and influence in the relationship, which encouraged him and allowed him to campaign for president and eventually succeed.
Well, how did you become interested in Mary Todd Lincoln? Of course, she was a very, very strong woman, but what other maybe strong women did you study, but then you ended up choosing Mary Todd Lincoln?
Well, I think I did because when I would talk to people about historical figures in women, I mean, whether it's Eleanor Roosevelt, who people admire, or some of the other first ladies, what I would often get, the response would be, Mary Todd Lincoln, wasn't she the crazy one who had headaches? And they really didn't know, many people, not all people, of course, anything else about her. And I became intrigued. I took this class, and the instruction was, or one of the instructions, well, take a historical figure and see what you can do as a solo with it. And at the time, I think that was in January or December, and they had, if you remember, the performance of Illinois. And it was, the time of the presidents and Lincoln. So I thought, well, why not? Let's start researching it. And, when I did, I just found out interesting things about her life and just how important she was in influencing Mr. Lincoln politically and being his support and also his political advisor and just who she was, which was a lot more than simply somebody who had headaches.
Exactly. Bill Morton and I, we actually saw your very, very lucky to see your performance at Illinois, and we were so intrigued. Actually, you're so correct. I always thought of Mary Todd Lincoln as very smart, but wise. How so smart? And then we didn't know that she had some mental issues or headaches, and then we had no idea about her background, and we were so enlightened and so grateful that we learned so much about her.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I of course I learned too. I'm not a Lincoln scholar as such, but I certainly learned a lot about the period, the time, and interesting things about her and how it came about that this rough, as they say, rough frontiersman, Abraham Lincoln, becomes politically astute, gets into the state legislature, and eventually the amazing thing is that he did become president, as she had always prophesized, as she would say it.
And by frontiersman, could you elaborate? What does a frontiersman do?
Well, they would use the term, I think, from people who lived on the western frontiers and in the location, which in this case would be Illinois. We don't think of Illinois anymore as the frontier, but it did. I mean, I think prior to him becoming president, they only had one other president, I think it was Andrew Jackson, who was not from the East Coast. So they saw him, differently, and throughout he, in some ways, had to struggle with that image. It was also used to parlay him into the presidency as the honest frontiersman versus some of the other presidents. But this is a man who was very the son of a poor farmer, had less than 1 year of formal education, taught himself, manages to become a delegate in the state Whigs, and continue. But when you think about it, I always like a part of the show where I discuss how he was not at home with Mrs. Lincoln, Mary Todd Lincoln, 5 to 6 months of the year because he was a lawyer, and the lawyers ride the circuit. That's why we have the Cook County Circuit Court. That's why it's called that. He rode a horse 830 miles, and as well as the judge. There was no sitting judge in these courtrooms, and they would go when they were in session, and they would go to one courtroom to the next, to the next, to the next, on horseback. So it was a very different world then, but he did have to always live up to that. On one hand, politically it helped him. On the other hand, he was not considered by the East Coast establishment as someone who was an able statesman, and considered, in their words, vulgar. And so when there would be bad press about either one of them, they would emphasize their vulgar Western ways, which really wasn't true at all. I mean, particularly with Mary Todd Lincoln, who was a woman who graduated from a French finishing school. Her family was quite wealthy, quite well known, like the Todds were like the Kennedys within Illinois, and became fluent in French, and was quite educated and a bibliophile.
Do you know what the Todd family wealth came from?
The wealth came here. Her father was a banker in Lexington, and Lexington was founded by her grandfather. They were a slave-owning family at that time. I don't know what all the members. It was a very large family. They did not. Her father did not have a plantation as such, but he did have a cotton factory, and they would have slave servants in their home, though they always opposed, as they would put it, the expansion of slavery. And so there was a real divide at that time between those people from the North, mainly, who advocated slavery's abolition, and then Southerners either were pro-slavery or they wanted slavery limited to what was there already. I mean, at the time, they didn't want to expand to the new states and the new territories that were coming into the United States.
So, in other words, the Todd family was of that mindset to not expand the slavery anymore. Were they in any way for abolishing?
You'll see in the progress of the performance that they move that way. Now, not the individuals. Mary Todd Lincoln and her husband, Mr. Lincoln, very much moved towards abolition, but it wasn't the entire Todd family was opposed to the expansion of slavery. It was their particular side of the family. Mm-hmm. And one of the issues you'll see, I mean, later on, which is post the time period that we work on in the solo play, that she was maligned by the press because she did have a very large family. Her mother died when she was 6, and there were 6 children there. The father remarries, and there's 9 more. So that she had brothers, at least 3 or 4 full or half brothers, who worked in the Confederacy and fought on the Confederate side. I think she had a couple that also fought on the Union side. So sometimes, as we see how rumors are today, people were concerned that she was perhaps a spy for the Confederacy. And then, of course, the people in the Confederacy were upset that she was a Unionist. So she was sort of caught in the middle there. But she was always a pro-Unionist at the time of the presidency. There's no doubt about that. And I think her views evolved. Her father did emancipate the slaves they had, I believe, in 1849 when he died through his will. But, of course, they had these servants beforehand. Once she marries Mr. Lincoln, they do not have any slaves at any point in their marriage or at that time. They had wage-earning servants. She was her closest friend. You won't find that in the performance, but during the time of the White House years, was a freed slave. And she was the first person to invite African Americans to dinner in the White House. So they were moving that way. I think for Mr. Lincoln to be elected, they took the middle ground, the Republicans, that we are opposed to the expansion of slavery, and they kind of were quiet about his personal beliefs so that he would get elected. But, he did do the Emancipation Proclamation to Frederick Douglass's, delight. And
let's bring Liam Collier in too. Liam, you're the director of this play, and you weren't on board before. But how did you and Bonnie come to work together?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So Bonnie and I met at a program called Generations, which is a storytelling, writing and performance program that is free and through the Goodman Theater. So Bonnie was taking a class that I was teaching up at Willie White Park in Rogers Park. It's a great space. Check it out. And we'd been working together for almost 3 years when Bonnie shared that she had created this one-person show and invited me to get involved. And so she sent me the script. I read it over and was, really fascinated by this character, by Mary Todd Lincoln, and also by how relevant this play felt right now. And so I got on board, and we've been working together on this for about 6 weeks. So it's very exciting to get to kind of step in to this piece that Bonnie's poured so much heart into, so much research. I was a history major in college, and so I definitely have a soft spot for a historical play as well. It's been a great experience getting to kind of step in and work alongside Bonnie to develop this next iteration of the show that's going up next weekend.
Well, by the way, speaking of Willie White Park, we hope that listeners will learn more about that wonderful space. I just became a member of the Park Advisory Council last week, and then Bill in the past has been president of the Willie White Park Advisory Council. So Bill knows that space very well, and I'm getting to love it more and more. I love it, but I still haven't explored all its possibilities, and I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, Liam, when you saw all the research that Bonnie had done, how did the two of you agree that you would direct the upcoming performances, and what did you do to change what Bonnie had?
Well, Bonnie had a great piece already, so it was less about changing it than about helping just enhance what was already there. There are about 7 minutes of new content, I guess, new pages, right, to the play that Bonnie added based on some conversations we had early on that I think are brilliant and definitely reveal some new angles of this relationship, and especially how much Mary Todd Lincoln shaped the political ambitions of Mr. Lincoln. In terms of what we did, I mean, we took a new look at some of the staging as well, thought about kind of how we could highlight particular parts of the story by restaging a little bit. And I think also kind of I functioned as maybe a bit of like a coach, encouraging you in the performance and helping you just lift up some of those moments. But the piece was so strong to begin with that honestly my job wasn't that hard. But yeah, I don't know if you would add anything to that, Bonnie, in terms of kind of your experience working with me this time and how it differed from kind of doing this on your own, or anything you thought it brought out in the performance that folks can look forward to.
I always think like 2 heads are better than one. Usually, that's what a director does. They can step back and take a look at a performance or a piece and see what they see in it, and perhaps you do work with something so closely you don't always see it. I think we understand more from some of the new material, the psychology of her sort of belief in Mr. Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
And I think rather than some writers have seen her as a sort of what do they call it? A millstone on Lincoln, something that made his life more difficult at times. And I think what I saw anyway, that was completely the opposite. That they truly had this relationship where each one needed one another. I think, to say she was interested in political power and felt he was the person to be president. And it wasn't that Mr. Lincoln was not ambitious. You don't get from where he was to where he ended up without ambition. But he needed, I think, I guess, someone who was devoted to his career. That was important, that this person was intelligent, could talk to him at his level about politics, and was completely 100% confident that he could succeed outside of the state legislature. I remember I had one of my friends mentioned when he first saw the show, the 10-minute show in the 10 workshop, he said, I don't know, after that, I wonder if he would have ever left the state legislature if it wasn't for Mary Todd Lincoln. Now, we don't know that for certain, but she certainly was a force behind him, both in his making political decisions, but he did suffer several setbacks. This is a man who only had one congressional term behind him when he succeeds running for president. He had lost the Senate. He wasn't named the one time he ran, and then he lost to Mr. Stephen Douglas the second time. So, that's quite phenomenal, and because he's a prairie lawyer from the western frontier. So maybe all the stars were aligned, but she felt very strongly that he deserved to be president, and he was basically destined to do so, and she was going to do everything she could to help him.
Mm-hmm. And I think we really, bring that out in this version of the show, where that comes from for her.
Yeah.
Well, Lincoln was when he became a member of the legislature. Was Mary Todd? Did she play any part in that?
She met him when he had been in the legislature about 1 year. So he was there, but in those days, and I won't go through all the kind of boring political details, the legislatures did much more. They were much more active in choosing who were going to be the national candidates. It wasn't until the 17th Amendment that there was, for example, direct voting for senators. You would vote for your state legislature, and they would vote who would run for Senate for that party. So you were not directed. The congressional is a little bit more complicated because it was always a direct popular vote. But Mr. Lincoln was in a district that was he was a Whig. There was Democrats and there were Whigs, basically. There were other parties, but those were the two big ones. And he was in a district, the only district in Illinois, that was heavily, heavily Whig. So basically, kind of whoever became the Whig candidate would probably, and he did, succeed in winning a term in the Congress. So it's sort of an unusual thing. So the Whigs would actually, the state legislatures would take turns amongst themselves as to which candidate they would choose. And Mr. Lincoln finally, after 5 years, became the candidate to run for Congress. And then he ran against a Democrat who, because of the district, was likely to lose, who did, you find these interesting things, he was a pastor, his opponent, and he accused Mr. Lincoln of being unchristian, because Mr. Lincoln never joined a church, any church, and was quite skeptical about religion. Mrs. Lincoln, Mary Todd, joined a church. Her family originally had been Episcopalians, and then one member founded a Presbyterian church, and they all became Presbyterians, and so that was her church. But he did succeed nonetheless, despite the kind of remarks that were being made about him.
Well, he being a frontiersman, he had to be very resourceful. And then, of course, if he applies that resourcefulness to politics, it will help him against some other candidates who were not frontiersmen.
Right. Well, yeah, he was a very able frontiersman and a very able politician. He was a smart politician. And his background of being I don't know how you would put it, a working person who had labored. His father would sometimes hire him out to the next farm because he was a big strapping boy. He was 6'4". He was our tallest president. And that it meant not only he had a feel for the public, the general public, and that helped him a lot in his elections when he was reelected. And he could sense what the common person will say, would how the public was feeling. I had read, for example, if we're going to talk about him, but we are talking about her because she knew everything that was going on and expressed her opinions to him and kept him alert to a lot of political things. But he had the Emancipation Proclamation written 6 months before he presented it to the public because he did not feel the public would accept it yet until finally later on with the war they did. But they were a couple. He ran the political decisions by her and through her, and she knew what was going on. She expressed her opinions. She knew the problems with the issue of slavery with the new territories. That was the big issue as to which ones would be slave and which one would be free. One of her beaux, of her many beaux as a young woman, was Stephen Douglas. And it's interesting because that's the person that Mr. Lincoln ran against for the presidency, ran against for the Senate. And he was he had mixed views, but he was quite open to the fact that the people in the territory should be allowed to choose whether or not they wanted slavery, where Lincoln believed that the founding fathers of the Constitution did not want that there should be federal control and there should be no more slavery in the new territories. And she was quite aware of that and expressed her opinions to him as to that. But it is interesting that he was a beau of hers. And I think what's interesting in those days, too, is you'll find that there would be these political battles, but the politicians would still socialize. So apparently in the first inaugural ball, of course, Mary loved to dance, and she danced with her husband, Mr. Lincoln, who then retired at midnight. And Mr. Stephen Douglas is invited to the inaugural ball, and she dances until 2 a.m. with him. So it's a little bit different than what we see today. I think there's that socialization. But it was a smaller group. There was no emails, no telephone calls. You had a choice, basically, of letters or meeting in person with another politician.
When Lincoln ran for president, what did Mary Todd Lincoln do to help her husband win? And did you include any of that in your story?
We did some because it sort of ends when he gets elected the first time. And I think mainly it was sort of the behind the scenes of encouraging him to do it in the sense that he hesitated. He hesitated for quite a while. He was very astute. She would help him record, for example, where state legislators stand on the way up when he's working on moving out of that. She was very devoted to him in his career, and she encouraged him very much to leave the state legislature. And he was reluctant because in his party, if you left the state legislature to run for Senate or a higher office, you couldn't go back to it. It was lost, and he wanted to keep his seat there. So I think just getting him to take that step, and he did not. There was a kind of concern by the campaign managers during that first election that his beliefs were too radical, that he was going to advocate the abolition of slavery. And in order to win, they were going to have this coalition of Whigs who were now the Republican Party. They became the Republican Party, and they included both abolitionists and people who, primarily from the more southern states, like Kentucky, who advocated, who did not want the expansion of slavery. So, in that case, he did not really give any campaign speeches once he was nominated for the position and was running. Now, Mr. Stephen Douglas gave a lot of campaign speeches, as we do. I mean, partly in those days, believe it or not, what I learned was it was sort of thought unseemly to campaign too much and express your views. So that's in part of it. But Stephen Douglas did do it. Lincoln did not. And that was, they didn't want his personal beliefs and her personal beliefs to interfere with the possibility of being elected. And, that's politics in a sense. That's, there is that of having a sort of compromise position that would allow the states and to have enough states at that point, and they were very concerned about that. They needed those border states that ended up staying with the Union, and not like the more southern ones like Mississippi and that leaving the Union.
So, in other words, he needed to be more of a silent candidate so that he wouldn't offend too many people. And as long as he doesn't offend them, there's a chance that they would vote for him.
Well, I mean, it's probably true with just about all politicians. There's politics in many ways.
At the same time, though, something that strikes me about the political moment that he's operating in, that we've talked about quite a bit, is the end of the Whig Party, being a key part of him becoming elected. The Whigs, you'll be able to speak about this better than I can, but they are compromising constantly and arguing about the issue of slavery, and the Republican Party forms in order to kind of draw a line in the sand and say, in one of the speeches that you quote in the play, you say, this is a moral issue, and there's people grasping for a middle ground, and Lincoln, in one of his speeches, rejects any middle ground, between those who believe slavery is right and those who believe it's wrong. So on the one hand, he is a politician, and he is trying to not say anything too offensive and not make speeches. But on the other hand, I think part of his popularity and part of what Mary Todd instilled in him was this clear sense of morality that you can only go so far, with this sort of stuff, and I'm not going to compromise. And it kind of fed into this image that was being cultivated around him of, Honest Abe, he's the plain speaking guy, but there's a directness to that too, and willingness to stand on your beliefs that I think is in the mix somewhere there too, in addition to him playing that political game.
Right. He starts like when he's running for Senate against the re-election of Stephen Douglas. I mean, and you have the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates, which are very well known. You see the year from about 1854, particularly until that was 1858. You see in those speeches before he is nominated that he is starting to frame slavery in terms of morality. He's hitting it on the nail, basically, at that point. And I think that's why they wanted him to quiet down a little bit once he accepted the nomination for president. But he was already, and Mary Lincoln was already there. Mm-hmm. I know there's a certain amount of historical information that will say she became an abolitionist before him. It's not clear exactly when her views turned, but certainly by that time she was pleased with his view. But then, of course, he lost the election to Stephen Douglas as a senator. So, there you have it, despite the beliefs. But you can see what's happening. And then the formation of the Republican Party, the Whigs were still debating, well, maybe we should just have slavery everywhere versus maybe we should not expand it. And then a few from the South would be we should abolish it. But the Republicans did not want slavery everywhere. They wanted it, there's the more moderate Republican who was like, I don't want the expansion. And then usually in the more northern states it was, let's abolish it. This is ridiculous. And, so that was their view going forward.
So the two of them were very let's say forceful thinkers, and they were very clear. Well, they did kind of like for Lincoln, he did like slowly formulate a tighter platform. But the two of them were kind of made for each other, it seems, because they were very strong-willed and had about the same moral compass.
Yeah, I think they did. I mean, on the one hand, and this is oversimplification, is she wanted power and he wanted devotion. And people look at some of the differences in their personalities. She was described as quick-tempered and needing attention, and by her own sister said that to her. And he was sort of self-contained. And so the temperament seemed quite different. And, the physicality, he's 6'4", she's 5'2". And, you see this kind of contrast, which is fun for theater. But, she read all, she was a bibliophile. I mean, she read constantly, political tracts, whatever. And the newspapers were very big in those days. That's what, I forgot which Frenchman said, boy, the Americans, they get a paper in the morning, they get a paper in the evening, they get a paper in the afternoon, and that's where you read all the speeches. I mean, they don't have TV, they don't have radio, and she read the editorials, would talk to him about the opinions that they were in them. She read the local papers. She was very astute. She gave her opinion on Stephen Douglas. She gave her opinion. He was offered at one point a job, basically, for his loyalty to the Whig Party before he became a Republican, as, it's sort of funny, the governorship of the Oregon territories. And she advised him very strongly, because it was not a good position. It was not good politically, that he would be in the backwater.
Yeah.
It was a dead end. And she was very angry at President Zachary Taylor. And she wrote, she wrote, for example, letters to his supporters saying, let's get him this other position as commissioner of the United States Land Services. And Taylor ends up offering him this other position, nonetheless. But she wrote them, and she signed the letters A. Lincoln. And so, he's aware of her doing this. It isn't that he disapproves, but, and I think some of that often continued, not knowing the history as well. Once they're in the White House, there would be hundreds of people asking for quote-unquote patronage jobs, especially during the war. My son needs to be a captain. And in the beginning, Lincoln would talk to every single one. It would take 6 hours a day for him to do this. And so some of those requests were funneled definitely through Mary, who would try to funnel through and give the request to the right general, or review it anyway. So she had that. She also later on had a salon, we would call it a French salon, where intellectuals talked about politics and art. Men and women who, some were married, some weren't. I mean, it was kind of a little bit racy that everyone would get together. But, even before that, her father was a politician in Lexington, a councilman, and she used to talk to her father as a young girl, a young woman, about the politics, and she would sometimes talk. The women would retire to the drawing room, and the men goes to the smoking room and talks politics. Well, she would sometimes join them in the smoking room. So, she early on, very, very intelligent woman, very strong-willed, and sometimes outspoken. He could be more, palliative or whatever with other people, and which was, good politician type of thing. But together, what a team. You put those two horses together and you got a good team to pull your carriage.
So you mentioned that Mary Todd wanted power. What did she need the power for? What was she aiming for?
Well, I think influence. She was not necessarily for women's suffrage. This was early on. She's not going to be that. But I think the idea of being able to shape public affairs and have some kind of career, beyond being, the wealthy, as her family would push her into, would be the wealthy mistress of a fine home, and that just wasn't enough for her. And she admired her father a great deal, and I think she saw some of that in Mr. Lincoln, even though when she first sees him, he doesn't have a lot of polish, and he grows into that. She could help him that way, and of course, I think she liked the dinners and the attention of being what we would now call the First Lady. I think the New York Herald first coined that later I think at the end of that first term. But and the way you would do this as a upper class woman in those days, it's always going to be through your spouse. There wasn't a lot of room for the single woman. I mean, there were single women who were reporters and things, but that's how you would get real influence. And she saw immediately how public affairs shaped people's lives. And I think he needed her devotion very much.
For the public affairs, of course, then she wanted to influence, but did she want to influence for something? Were there some goals that she wanted to have accomplished?
Well, I mean, she did do things. I mean, this is later in the White House that I saw her do. I mean, I had recently read that she had set up a nursing corps for the men, and she did. I believe she, and she was very quiet about this. People don't know about it. She didn't ask for publicity, apparently, later on. When she was there, and she set up a fund, for example, because of her friendship, I think, with Elizabeth Keckley, who was a freed slave, was her closest friend in the White House. You realize there would be people who came into Washington, D.C., and they'd be living, I don't know whether it was with tents, in a place called Freedom City, Freedom Village, and they would have no skills, no marketable skills. They might be field hands. They would have no money, and they wouldn't even know, because they were slaves very often, who their family was. She did help get some of them employment, but she did contribute money to that fund that actually Elizabeth Keckley, who was a dressmaker and a freed slave, set up. So there were those things like that in the nursing choir. But I think mainly it was to see her husband become the most influential person in the country.
Liam, you must have noticed how the width and depth of all of Bonnie's research that she put in for her monologue. I'm sure that in these 6 short weeks, you were not able to delve into all of that research. How did you pick what research to also have Bonnie maybe share with you so that you could contribute to directing her monologue?
Well, as you've all already seen today, Bonnie is, you might not be a Lincoln expert yet, but you have a ton of knowledge. So what's great about that is a lot of it comes up in the rehearsal room. So we'll be talking about a specific moment of the play, and Bonnie will say, well, this character, who I mentioned, Mr. Webb, in this one scene, let me tell you this other story, and how that informs what's happening in this moment, and all the connections of this life. So a lot of it, I haven't spent a lot of time digging into the books you've read. I've mostly relied on Bonnie as a resource. But I think that makes sense for working in the context of a piece of theater. Sometimes we will, in a discussion, say, well, what Mary Todd is saying here isn't entirely, fair to Mr. Lincoln, or she's kind of blowing this out of proportion a bit. She cuts people off throughout this play when they upset her. But we'll keep coming back to, but what does Mary Todd believe? In this moment where she is in this carriage yelling at Abraham Lincoln, about whatever. The important thing from an acting perspective and from a theatrical perspective is, what does Mary Todd believe? And even more importantly, maybe, what does our version of Mary Todd Lincoln in this particular play believe? And that's how we find kind of the truth of those moments. And so I haven't done a lot. I've relied on Bonnie for the research mostly, but we have a lot of conversations about everything that's happening around the play and the things that happen before and after. We kind of have set it up this time imagining that Mary Todd Lincoln is further along in her life, and she has gone through a lot that we don't discuss in the play, and now she's sitting down to set the record straight, essentially. And so those moments of research, even from after the events of the play have concluded, affect, how she thinks about the things that she's talking about now and the perspective she has. You can talk maybe about some of what she went through even after Lincoln's assassination in terms of her trial and the way that she was mistreated, but this need to I said it before, but set the record straight, tell her own story is really core to who our version of Mary Todd Lincoln is in this moment. She has been, the press was kind of on her side, it seems like, towards the end, but she has been put through it and cast in a certain way even before the history books start being written. And so all of that research that and all our discussions has really, I think, informed the character who we see on stage. And who knows, we'll never meet Mary Todd Lincoln. So who knows if we say this is a historically accurate play, we don't have a real life person to compare to. But I think the research has allowed us to really find historical truth, even if not every beat we can say 100% is what she would have said or thought.
Right. It's the core of the story, that you kind of build out of or whatever. And I think one of the fun things in writing it is much of the fun lines of people, what they say and do, are direct quotes from either her letters or what people said she said or what they said, and it gives the flavor of the 19th century and the kind of language that is used in it. So, and I tried very hard to stay at least consistent with what I know. I mean, we have her last ride in the carriage with Mr. Lincoln. In the story, he asks her, what do you want to do? You want to travel? I'm just giving an example. And she says, yes, and where would you like to go? Paris. Well, we know, first of all, that during the last week of his life, they did discuss what he was going to do at the end of the term, and at least from what other people who talked to them said. And they wanted to travel. They wanted to go to Europe. They wanted to go to the Holy Land. Then they were going to go to California, and then they were going to retire in Springfield. Mm-hmm. And then when he asked her where in Europe basically you want to go, well, she was enamored with French. I mean, she was a fluent French speaker. I mean, she spoke to one of the relatives of Napoleon in perfect French. She went to a French finishing school. She loved, her dress. She was often accused of being extravagant, but she was doing French dress. Mm-hmm. There's one point where, they say Mr. Lincoln is like saying, well, your gown is cut a little bit low there. Well, maybe by prudish American standards, but by the standards she liked, which was French. So it's consistent that she might say, I know they wanted to go to Europe. For her to say, where would you go? I'd like to see Paris. Mm-hmm. And then I know for a fact that after his assassination, at a point in her life, I think with her younger son, who was still alive at that time, they went to Paris. So that's what, when we say historically accurate, if I can't know for sure, I can certainly put the pieces together and give a portrait.
And one thing having read the script, I know a lot of what is the direct quotes because we've talked about it. But I remember when I saw the first piece of this that I had seen, you did a scene at an open mic in Rogers Park at Charmers. I remember how quickly you fell into the language, and you said to me something like, where did that phrase come from? It just came out of me. And I think that because you've spent so much time looking at the text itself, it really feels seamless. I mean, between the contemporaneous quotes that you're using from her writing and from what people have said she said, and the things you've written yourself, you've really found her voice in a way that is really excellent.
You have the mannerisms too. When we saw you at Illinois, you kind of assumed the mannerisms of Mary Todd Lincoln. what kind of research did you do to acquire that?
Well, I mean, I think some of it is just wearing a dress and those kinds of things. But I mean, we had a discussion, Liam and I, lately about her stomping her foot when she got angry, and we're like, Liam's like, well, really, she's it really kind of goes far, doesn't it? A little bit childish. And I said, well, that was historically accurate, because people would say when she got angry, she would stomp her foot. And I reminded him, I think the movie was Young Mr. Lincoln, that there's a movie where Sally Field plays Mary Todd Lincoln as a debutante or whatever, and she stamps her foot because those people who research know that is something she did. So the small things like that, and I don't know, I think sometimes almost language influences your movements, and maybe it's a subconscious way, I don't know, but yeah, and she's also looking back at us as an older person, and I being an older person, find that easier. But she's looking back at her youth as an older person. So, we researched it that way, the things that she would do, as much as we could. I mean, she, the dance that she might do would not be the same as what we would do.
When you listen to Bonnie's stories about Mary Todd Lincoln, Liam, which kind of stories interested you the most, that you felt that had to be incorporated more deeply into the play, into the monologue?
Well, the politics I'm always interested in, because we're in a unique political moment, to say the least, right now, and I think there's a lot to learn from this moment that we're looking at. But when I first looked at the play, this thing that struck me was this idea of her sense of prophecy and her sense of knowing from the beginning that she was going to be Mrs. President. She believed it fully, and this unshakable conviction that she had. And so that's the part of the character that stood out to me right away. And so and that's historically accurate. That was her sense of things. Those are her words. And so getting to hear about that, I think, is an aspect that really came out, and I enjoyed learning more about her sense of that. The way that she set up spaces, she was a sparkling conversationalist. She really leveraged this aristocratic, maybe is the word for it, upbringing that she had to advance Lincoln's career and in by extension advance her own, right, and carve out a space for herself in this male-dominated world. And she hearing about her strawberry parties, I think is great. They didn't have a ton of money at first, and she would host parties for the prominent politicians and change makers, and she would make a simple white cake and serve it with strawberries. So it wasn't this extravagant affair, but she's able to, in their modest lifestyle, use her sense from her upbringing of how to socialize and how to impress people, and take something very simple and become known for it. Then it becomes known that she hosts these strawberry parties, and you have to go to Mary Todd Lincoln's strawberry parties. They're the place to be, and she's able to kind of use the limited resources she has, plus her knowledge from her youth, and combine those and turn it into an opportunity, and then use that to get the power and consolidate and get her husband ahead. And I think she's just very clever in that way. So I've really enjoyed learning about her political machinations, as well as just getting to know her through Bonnie's portrayal of her.
So in other words, all that leveraging through these strawberry parties help gain some wealthy supporters for Lincoln's candidacy?
Yeah, and political power behind him as well, is my understanding. Because the candidates, were being selected not through a vote, but you needed to know the right people. You needed their support first before you could even think about people voting for you. And so, yes, her ability to create these social spaces and create these parties absolutely was key to him advancing.
So intriguing, this monologue from Bonnie Bagdon, Mrs. President, a new one-woman show written and performed by Bonnie Bagdon about Mary Todd Lincoln. Liam Collier is the director. And Liam and Bonnie, could you tell us the details about your the upcoming performances?
Absolutely. So we have 3 shows coming up next weekend. On Friday, February 28th at 7, Saturday, March 1st at 7, and we have a Sunday matinee, so you can come see us and then go see the Oscars later that night on March 2nd at 2 p.m. It's $15 a ticket. It's family-friendly. It's all are welcome. And you can get your tickets by calling 708-749-4900. Again, that's 708-749-4900. There also will be walk-up tickets, so you can join us at the theater, which is 1529 Harlem Avenue in Berwyn, Illinois.
And the name of the theater is North Berwyn Park District's 16th Street Theater?
Yes, and we'll be at the Valors Activity Center, which again is at 1529 Harlem Avenue in Berwyn, Illinois.
Well, thank you so much, Liam Collier and Bonnie Bagdon. If our listeners want to learn more about you, Bonnie, where should they go?
Well, they can look at my website, which is conveniently www.bonniebagdon.com.
Thank you so much for listening. This is WLUW Chicago 88.7 FM.
We've enjoyed it.
Thank you.